Hello, this is Read Into the Unknown, and I'm a YouTuber who still hasn't figured out their handle yet. Unknown Reviewer? Let's go with that. Today, I'm going to be talking about Mark of Character, a Pride and Prejudice Soulmarks story, written by Sarah Courtney, I believe in 2023. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling story. It has a 4.3 on Goodreads with 474 reviews, so less than 1,000. So, funny story, I read a lot of fan fiction, as you can probably tell by my literary choices. But fan fiction, normally you can't sell and make money off of unless the work's in the public domain. So there's actually a I'm not gonna say very large, but there is a largish community of authors that take usually Pride and Prejudice, but some of the other classics, and tell their own version of. For Pride and Prejudice specifically, there are two fairly well-known versions. One of them being Bride and Prejudice, which is a modern-day retelling in modern-day India, or at least whenever it was written, 2000s. That was made into a fairly popular movie. At least that's one that you could probably easily find. And another one that was a book and a movie and also fairly well known is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. To make a point, I saw the movie Pride and Prejudice, and I also read most of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. That one needs no explanation, and for that reason I was just not terribly interested in it, because it was the book, but there were the occasional zombie. It wasn't that interesting. What is interesting is that the Pride and Prejudice story is such a big thing for people to want to retell its story. I'm sure a lot of it is just people love Mr. Darcy, or at least people who are attracted to men love Mr. Darcy. What's not to like? He is a handsome man. Of course, he's eligible, he's rich, he's the full package. But he's kind of a jerk. But he recognizes that he's a jerk, and he grows, and he changes, and oh, the yearning. There's so much yearning. He yearns for Elizabeth. And of course, we can't help but love the yearn. I mean, that one scene in the 05 version of Pride and Prejudice where Mr. Darcy walks away, and he has the hand thing. We love it. So, I think that just leads us into have this backbone in which it's really fun to tell stories from these characters specifically. And I've always found it interesting what the authors of these stories want to highlight, who they see as the villains, who they see as misunderstood, and how they interpret these characters all these years later. Some people really see Mrs. Bennet as, overbearing and terrible and just conniving. Other people just see her as, she's a worried mother. She has 5 daughters and she has nothing to give them. They need to get married, so of course she's extremely worried. Sometimes Jane is just so sweet. Sometimes she's way too passive. Sometimes she's conniving. And what about Bingley? Is he just fickle, or is he just young and impressionable and too willing to take his friend's advice? But it leads into a lot of interesting takes you can take on this story, and it really says a lot, I think, about the people who write these stories and how they interpret these characters. So going back a bit, let's very briefly recap Pride and Prejudice for anyone who's coming in here blind, which I don't see why you would, all 2 people who might see this. So Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley, along with extras, come to this small town where there are a bunch of unmarried and unwed females who, in the time period, really do need to get married. Their life is miserable if they don't get married. Bingley falls in love with Jane. They're split apart because the sisters and Mr. Darcy don't like the fact that she's poorer than Bingley. Eventually, Darcy proposes to Elizabeth. Elizabeth says, no, you're a jerk. You did the thing. You broke up Jane and Bingley, and Wickham says you're a jerk. Wickham's a random guy who says you're a jerk, and I don't trust him. Darcy leaves. Wickham turns out to be a bad guy, runs off with another girl, and Darcy saves the day. Everyone ends up getting married and has a happily ever after. Jane marries Bingley, Darcy marries Elizabeth, and Wickham and Lydia go get shipped off to the north, and all reputations are saved, everyone's married, everyone has a good time. Once again, the backbone of the story isn't as interesting as what we take away from some of these characters and how we envision how things would change if the circumstances had changed. Case in point, the large number of stories that take liberties with the setting. And this one already says what the difference is in its subtitle, a Soulmark story. I swear, if this was, on AO3, it would have hashtags, or tags such as mutual pining, yearning, soulmate identifying marks. I guess the last thing before I get into it is, in case you haven't told, I'm gonna be talking about the book. I am going to be spoiling the book. If it sounds interesting, if you want to dip your toe into this, go for it. Otherwise, have fun. Enjoy the ride. So, of course, since this is a Soulmark story, what does that mean? For the uninitiated, Soulmarks are a trope in which two people who are meant to be together, they are soulmates, they will share some sort of mark. And there's many ways this plays out. Sometimes it's a picture they both share, sometimes they have each other's names, sometimes it's the first line that you will hear them say, sometimes it's the last line you will ever hear them say. Many different interpretations. In this one, it is soulmates have the same sort of picture. And it's vague what they couldn't be. The main couple have a flower that they both have. They were just birthmarks that they were born with. Well, Darcy got his after Elizabeth was born since she was younger. And she was born basically with it developing as a baby. So as soon as both parties in this union are born, the soul mark appears. And in this book, they are not on everyone. They are only for people who care about the land. So usually it's the landowners, so the wealthy, but it could also be farmers, shepherds, people really into forestry, animal husbandry, just anyone who wants to take care of the land could have a soul mark. Not guaranteed, but they could have one. And it is the Church of England basically said, hey, we think that since you're supposed to be the stewards of the land, if you find your soulmate, if you find someone who matches your soul mark, boom, you guys get married, it's good to go. We're just gonna trust you guys. Doesn't matter what the difference in statuses are. You could be an earl and you could be a scullery maid. Boom, it's fine, you're gonna get married. And part of that is that in this universe, if you do not find your match, you start to die. And it says, it's a little bit vague on the symptoms and exactly when it starts, but it's like, oh, maybe around in your 30s or 40s if you still haven't found them. Or if you have found them and you just don't know it and you guys haven't married or anything, then yeah, you start to wither away and die, sort of as a wasting disease. And sort of puts pressure on making sure that you aren't kept separate from your soulmate. So if your parents don't like them, tough, you gotta get married or you're gonna die. Also interesting, does not address any kind of homosexuality or anything. Like, it just seems like it's straight couples, which is weird. I guess you could say, well, they're also supposed to have kids, but you can be married and not have kids even if you're straight. So I guess, I don't know. The author just didn't want to go there, I guess. Maybe it exists and it was just never brought up. To be fair, this is also a Regency romance, and the original story didn't have anything like that, so sure, you don't want to go into it. Fair enough. But it is always interesting in these soulmate stories how they handle things like trans identities and homosexuality and just weird, like other forms of relationships. Like, can you have a platonic soulmate? Do you have multiple based on like platonic and romantic and familial? But that's a side point. So, the stage has been set. This story starts right at the first assembly where the meet cute happens, where Darcy meets Elizabeth and Jane meets Bingley. So, the Bingley crowd comes in, and oh look, there's Bingley, and oh yes, he's smitten with Jane, she's so pretty. And Mr. Darcy comes in with his fiancée, Miss Bingley, Mr. Bingley's sister, the harpy shrew that we just love to hate in the community. And they're coming in already engaged. Because it is a well-known fact that Mr. Darcy has a Soulmark, and Miss Bingley has his match. So they found this out just a couple months ago, so they instantly got engaged. But Mr. Darcy does not like Miss Bingley, and so he wants to postpone the marriage as much as possible. So everyone's like, hey, you guys can get married tomorrow if you want. And Mr. Darcy's saying, let's put a pin in that. And he is miserable because he has seen people who have Soulmarks, who have met their soulmate, and he sees how happy they are. And it's just well known that if you have a soulmate, you have found the person that will love you and you will always love. It doesn't mean the relationship, like, you can't work on it. No, you gotta still work on your relationship, but they will be your match and you will love them. You will be drawn to them. It will be sort of like magic. And he has Miss Bingley, who he just doesn't like. Even if she wasn't, she is very much a bit of a harpy shrew in this one. But even if she wasn't that, they are just two different personality-wise. She wants to stay in town. He wants to stay in the country. She's obsessed with status. He doesn't care as much about that. Like, he's not going to be snubbing his nose at someone just because they're the second cousin of an earl. He wants to be there for the people, like his tenants, and he wants to, be a good master of Pemberley, where, once again, Miss Bingley, Caroline, wants just the status involved. She wants the money, she wants the prestige, she wants people to look up at her and admire her. And that's not what Mr. Darcy's about. So they show up at the assembly. Jane and Bingley are sort of hitting it off, and Mr. Darcy, like he did in the original novel, insults Elizabeth. He says, nope, she's not pretty, I don't want to dance with her. And if there's an extra thing like, hey, your sister, my soulmate, wouldn't like it, so I'm not really going to be dancing. But he notices that Elizabeth hears, and instead of being sad or running away or challenging him or anything like that, she just laughs at it. Like, you don't know me and you have called me ugly and insulted me. Like, you're making a horrible impression. So she laughs it off. He is impressed by that, and thus the story continues with them occasionally meeting, especially since Mr. Bingley really likes Jane, Mr. Darcy tags along, and Mr. Darcy's noticing more and more just how much he's noticing Elizabeth. Mr. Darcy can't help but be drawn to her. And that makes him miserable, because he's feeling more of a pull towards this random woman than his soulmate. And Miss Bingley is incredibly smart in this, because she clocks that. Mr. Darcy doesn't really show attention to the ladies, ever, because he just doesn't like socializing. He doesn't want to, he had a soulmate already kind of picked out for him, so why is he going to be flirting and dancing, and that's not him. But he's paying attention to this other girl. She clocks that. She's clearly worried. So we get Mr. Darcy pining. We get Elizabeth slowly realizing that Mr. Darcy's more than the hurtful comment he said at the assembly. And they start to notice each other and sort of how will they, sort of riff off of each other. While Miss Bingley, once again, notices that, and she has schemes. She also knows that Elizabeth does have a soul mark as well, and no one knows what it is, but she knows that Elizabeth has one. Pretty common knowledge. So while her and Mr. Darcy supposedly have matching soul marks, Hi there. I have a visitor. Anyway, so she also knows Elizabeth has a soul mark, and while it is very obvious to the reader that Caroline has somehow forged her soul mark and made it look like Mr. Darcy's, theoretically the characters in the story don't know that yet. So they're still operating on the assumption they're soulmates. It's gonna happen. If they don't get married, they're gonna die. So that has to happen eventually. Well, as Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth sort of get closer, Caroline starts to try to sabotage them getting closer. She tries to sabotage Jane and Mr. Bingley getting closer together. And then, more characters start coming into the mix. Mr. Darcy's cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, and his wife, because they're also soulmates, show up. And that allows Mr. Darcy to have a person to confide in, how much he hates Miss Bingley, and how much he does not want to marry her. How much he's starting to pine for someone else. And as it culminates and it grows, we have Collins coming in. Collins is the Bennet's cousin who's going to inherit. He comes in, he acts a fool. We have Caroline subtly passing on information like, hey, yeah, Elizabeth would be the wrong age to be your soulmate. And also passing on just little hints here and there that, while Mr. Darcy is drawn to her, of course that's not your soulmate, I am. But then Elizabeth starts clocking things as well. Elizabeth starts clocking, hey, if you two met already, and it was, you guys have known each other for a few years, and you're still not married, this feels a little weird. Like, why aren't you two already sort of hitched? Why are you delaying? Why does Mr. Darcy seem so miserable around you when soulmates are supposed to be, like, sort of perfectly in sync? Why is Miss Bingley always, giving snide remarks to me? Why is she acting like I'm a threat? That's her soulmate. And right before the big Netherfield ball, which in the original novel was sort of the last moment of happiness for Jane and Bingley's relationship before they get broken up, and sort of the culmination in the Bennets acting silly at a ball, and this instead is sort of the final moment where everything comes to a head. Darcy has been feeling worse and worse, both emotionally because he can't be with the person he now realizes he loves, is Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is devastated that she realizes that she is now in love with Mr. Darcy, a man who is both going to be married, and it has a soulmate that is not her. Mr. Darcy has been getting aches and pains, and he's feeling sicker and weaker, and he can't figure out why. We can guess that it was probably that disease I mentioned, that soulmates who don't bond end up getting, because, he's right by Elizabeth, but they're not, they're not making a match, so of course he's gonna start withering away very quickly, like you do. Elizabeth doesn't, though, so I don't know, whatever. But at the day of the ball, Miss Bingley manages to get Jane out of the picture. She feeds Jane something she's sick that makes her sick. Jane has to go home. She has a servant drop an entire bucket of ashes on Elizabeth, ruining her dress and making her look horrible, so she's gonna need to go home. And Mr. Darcy is about to collapse in the ballroom out of just the aches and pains that he's feeling. Well, Elizabeth's friends, Charlotte Collins, not Charlotte Collins, she didn't get married to Collins in this one. She normally does, but not in this one. But her friend Charlotte says, hey, you're covered in ashes, why? And Elizabeth's like, I feel like there's something going on. It feels like, there's a conspiracy behind it. I know that I'm Mr. Darcy's soulmate, and I think Caroline's keeping us apart. So Charlotte's like, okay, here's my dress, go figure it out. You gotta talk to Mr. Darcy. If you're so sure that he's your soulmate, you gotta go let him know. I like how people just trust Elizabeth in this one. So Elizabeth goes to him and he's collapsed, and Caroline's like, oh, we gotta remove him to London, we gotta take him away from this place, because she knows she needs to take him away, and we need to get married like right away, because she also knows he's dying, because they're not soulmates. We gotta get him away, and Elizabeth's like, you gotta let me in, I know why he's sick. She runs in and kisses him, and instantly Darcy just jumps up and he's better, and everyone's like, okay, yeah, clearly you two are soulmates because you two are glowing. Oh, so very quickly Caroline's schemes are exposed. Turns out that since her family is from the trade, whenever they went to school, all the noble daughters bullied her and her older sister relentlessly until Caroline started pretending that she had a soulmate. And as the rumors spread and spread, Caroline was gonna never let that one down because it got her a lot of admiration and attention because, you're gonna marry someone attached to the land and it's kind of a mark of status. So eventually, Charles, Mr. Bingley, introduces Mr. Darcy to Caroline, and she goes, "Oh, he's unmarried. He's gonna have this like huge property, and he's got a soulmate. I could totally pretend to be his soulmate." So in this story, Wickham, evil bad guy, he does show up only in the background. He finds out what Mr. Darcy's soul mark is, and Caroline gets that mark tattooed on her body, which this is the first Soulmark story I've read, which yes, I've read several, where someone gets a soul mark tattooed on them, which why is that not more of a thing, especially since many of these are told in the modern day, not necessarily Pride and Prejudice Soulmark stories, but just Soulmark stories in general. Many of them are in the present day, and I don't see much talk about counterfeiting Soulmarks. But yeah, she got it tattooed on her body, so no one would question it. And it wouldn't be like, oh, I have to repaint this every day, and it's gonna look weird, and I'm gonna... Nope. It's on there permanently. She did that deliberately to get Mr. Darcy to marry her so that she would get all his money and property and wealth. Even though she was dooming 2 people to die, because she was gonna doom Mr. Darcy to die, because he would eventually die from not being attached to his soulmate, and whoever his soulmate was, they would also die. And Caroline's like, oh, they wouldn't really die. And everyone's like, yes, they would. Yes, they would. That is part of it. Yes, they are going to die if they didn't get married. And you are willing to murder 2 people for status. Oh, so story wraps up very quickly. Darcy and Elizabeth get married. Jane and Mr. Bingley are about to be engaged. And, people start pairing off, and it's all sweet. And it turns out this entire thing was them telling the story to their two of their 3 children about, hey, we know both of you have soul marks, and this is why you gotta keep it secret. Because if people know what your soul marks are, they could potentially go after you. So you gotta keep it secret and keep it safe. And then, of course, they go, well, then how would I know ever if I meet my soulmate? If no one ever sees the other person's soul mark, how do you know that that's your soul mark? And they're like, oh, you'll know. I'm like, no, they're still, I'm still questioning. Yes, I have a friend. Don't worry, we're nearly done. So, all in all, this isn't high art, but it was a very enjoyable story. It was a very popcorn, it was a very fast read. And in the way that fan fiction just... you just really enjoy reading it, and it's like full of tropes, and it's like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? Like, it really hooked me in the same way that does. It's just very bingeable, very lovely to read. Though I do find it interesting, this was not my first Pride and Prejudice Soulmark story that I've read. This is in fact the second Pride and Prejudice Soulmark story I've read. The other one I won't give a full review on, but it is called Meet Your Mark by Elizabeth Adams. It is a shorter version of the story, but it also involves soulmates and soulmarks in Pride and Prejudice. Different world. In this world, anyone who wants it can get their soul mark. Basically, once you turn 13, I'm gonna say, a priest can say, hey, do you want your soul mark? And you could say, yep, and they'll put it on you, or nope, and they won't. Well, why would you ever say no? Because rich people don't want to marry poor people. Yeah, it was all a status thing. After too many rich people ended up marrying their maids or whatever, or their butlers, they're like, no, we're not going to do this. Stop getting your soul mark. Now, of course, if either party says yes, then they both get their soul mark. So you could be born with your soul mark, or you could get yours, when you're like 5, because the other person was 13 and said yes. Or if you say yes and they were older, like say you were 13 and they were 17 and you say yes, yeah, at 17 years old, they're going to get their soul mark. They don't really get a say. So that story was it doesn't cover as much with the meeting of Darcy and Elizabeth, because usually the stories are very, very centered around Darcy, Elizabeth, and their families, and after they meet. This one had a lot more build-up. I feel like over half the story was just build-up. It talked about what happens when you're given a choice to meet your soulmate, but whatever you decide for them as well. For instance, Elizabeth, one of 5 sisters, 2 of her sisters just got their soul mark. Like, they just started appearing one day. So they're clearly older, potential partners, had said yes. So they didn't really get a choice, they just got their soul mark. So when it came time for Elizabeth to go in and make a choice, she hadn't gotten hers yet. Because Mr. Darcy didn't want to, because what if he had to marry a poor, because his family's a little snobby. You know, her father's like, hey, you were most likely going to be younger than your partner, because that's the way things worked back then. And if they haven't already said yes, you might be forcing this on them. And Elizabeth goes, well, it was forced on Jane and Kitty, so if it can be forced on us, why can't I, like, why is it on me to say no just because they might have said no? And hey, maybe they are younger than me, and we just don't know it yet. We can't, like, this is unfair. You're making me say no because the other person might want to say no. And her father's like, yeah, you make a good point. So it does talk a little bit about how you can force someone to be in a relationship with you. Now, granted, once again, it's supposed to be soulmates. This is your match. But you did kind of take away someone's choice. For instance, like, once you get your soul mark, you're never going to be attracted to anyone else other than your soulmate. So it was interesting to see the different takes on the soul marks. The story, this story, Mark of Character, focuses more on the yearning and the just mutual pining of, I thought we would, I love you, but you already have someone else as your soulmate. Whereas Meet Your Mark is more about growing up with these soul marks and the choices that you end up making, and what would make someone decide to pick one versus another one, and how does your character affect your mark and your potential spouse. So, once again, just interesting. If I had a nickel for every Pride and Prejudice retelling with Soulmarks, I mean, I'd have 2 nickels. Please let me know if there are more. I am sure there are. But yeah, just way too long of a deep dive into a very niche but still popular subgenre of Pride and Prejudice retellings, sometimes with supernatural elements. At least these are a bit more grounded than some of the other ones that I have read. Some of them just go really off the rails. But anyway, hope you enjoyed. All 0 people who will probably read this, hey, maybe it'll get really popular. I look forward to that. Maybe I'll be the next big thing. Anyway, have a great day. Hope you enjoyed my cat for the cameo. He's right over there now. He's doing a thing. It's cute. I'm not going to move the camera. Bye.